The knock came at 2:14 in the morning. Kieran Solís knew the exact time because he just looked at the clock above the parts shelf, the one with the cracked plastic casing that his uncle had hung there 15 years ago and never replaced. He knew it because he'd been debating whether to give up on the transmission he was rebuilding. A '98 Silverado belonging to a woman named Mrs. Pelletier who needed her truck back by Thursday and couldn't afford to pay him what the job was actually worth. He'd been on his knees on the concrete floor for 3 hours. His back was talking to him, and then the knock came. Not a knock, really. A fist. 3 solid impacts against the bay door, the kind that didn't ask permission. Kieran set down the snap ring he was holding and stayed where he was for a moment. The garage was on the edge of Rimouski, Quebec. Not the rough part of town, but not the kind of neighborhood where people wandered in by mistake at 2 in the morning either. The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside, wind was coming off, the St. Lawrence hard enough to rattle the roll-up door in its frame. He stood up slowly, wiped his hands on a rag, and walked to the side panel by the door. He hit the intercom button. "We're closed," he said. His voice came out steady, which surprised him a little. A pause, then, "I can see the lights on." The voice was male, unhurried, not drunk. Kieran had heard enough drunk to know the difference. There was road in it, gravel and distance, the particular flatness of someone who had learned not to waste words. "Lights on because I'm working," Kieran said. "Not because we're open. Come back tomorrow at 8. Another pause, longer. "My bike's running rough. I made it as far as your lot. I don't think I'm going to make it much further tonight." Kieran pressed his forehead briefly against the cold metal of the wall panel. He thought about the rule his boss, Raymond Gervais, had posted in laminated print above the office door. No after-hours service. No exceptions, liability purposes. Do not open the bay for anyone you have not cleared with management first. He thought about the fact that Gervais had said those words to him directly, on his first week, 6 months ago, with the particular emphasis of someone who had been burned before and intended to make sure it didn't happen again. He thought about a man standing outside in the October wind with a bike that wasn't running right and nowhere to go. He hit the button that lifted the bay door. The man who walked in under the rising door was large. Not soft large, but the kind of large that accumulates over decades of outdoor work and physical life. He was somewhere in his late 50s. He had a gray beard, kept short, and silver hair that the wind had pushed sideways under a half helmet he was carrying in the crook of his arm. He was wearing a leather vest with patches, the kind Kieran had grown up recognizing even if he'd never been part of that world. The top rocker read Iron Coffins MC. The bottom rocker read Quebec. Behind him, through the open door, Kieran could see the bike parked just inside the lot. A Harley-Davidson Road Glide, black over black, well kept. It was a good machine. Whoever this man was, he took care of what he owned. "Appreciate it," the man said. He looked around the garage without making a production of it, the kind of survey a person does automatically when they walk into an unfamiliar space. His eyes settled on Kieran for a moment. "You the mechanic?" "I'm the only one here," Kieran said. The man extended his hand. "Real," he said. His full name, it turned out. Kieran wouldn't learn until much later that most people in Real Gagnon's world called him something else entirely. Kieran, they shook. Real's hand was dry and very strong, and he let go at the right moment, not a second too long. "What's she doing?" Hesitation on acceleration. "Pulling lean. Started 2 hours out of Rivière du Loup, got worse the closer I got to here." Kieran nodded. He looked past Real at the road glide through the still open door. "Push it in," he said. "Let me have a look." He started with the basics. Fuel pressure first. He pulled the gauge from the drawer on the left side of the rolling cart, the top drawer that stuck slightly and required a specific upward jerk before it would cooperate. He'd been meaning to fix that for weeks. He hooked up the gauge while Real stood back near the office door, arms crossed, watching without comment. The reading came back low, not catastrophically low, but low enough. "How long since you filled the tank?" Kieran asked. "Moncton. Early afternoon. Did you fill it yourself or let the attendant do it?" Real looked at him. "Filled it myself. Always do." "Did anything seem off about the pump? Smell unusual?" A pause. Real thought about it, actually thought, didn't just dismiss the question. There was something. "I noticed it, but I didn't stop on it. Slight smell. Figured it was the pump itself." Kieran straightened up. He looked at the fuel line, at the filter housing. "I think someone's been watering stock at that station, or there's contamination in their underground tank. It happens. Older stations along the 20. Sometimes in fall when there's been a lot of rain, water gets into the ground tank and it moves up through the pumps. You wouldn't know until your machine starts complaining." He pulled a sample from the fuel line into a clear inspection tube, held it up to the fluorescent light. The separation was subtle, but it was there. A slight cloudiness near the bottom of the tube, a faint shimmer that didn't belong. "There it is," Kieran said. Real came closer to look. He studied the tube for a moment. "Can you fix it tonight?" "I can flush the fuel system, replace the filter, clean the injectors, put in a fresh tank. She'll run clean when I'm done." Kieran set the tube down on the cart. "It's going to take me a couple of hours." Real didn't ask what it would cost. He said, "Tell me what you need me to do. There's a chair in the office. Coffee maker's on the counter. There's half a pot left from this afternoon. I can't promise it's good. Stay out of the way and let me work." For the first time since he'd walked in, Real smiled. It was a small thing, brief, but it changed the whole look of his face. Fair enough, he said. Kieran worked. He'd been doing this since he was 14 years old, starting in his Uncle Bernard's driveway in Matan, learning on a 92 Bonneville that had no business being anyone's first bike to work on. Bernard Solís had handed him tools without explaining what they were for, and expected Kieran to figure it out, which at the time had felt like cruelty and in retrospect had been the best education he'd ever received. By 17, he could diagnose most common failures by sound alone, the particular knock of a worn bearing, the whistle of a vacuum leak, the rough idle that said fuel before any gauge confirmed it. He'd never finished his degree at the vocational college in Rimouski because Gervais's shop had offered him a position, and he'd needed the money badly enough that he'd taken it. He'd told himself he'd go back. That was 3 years ago. He drained the contaminated fuel carefully, disposing of it properly. He pulled the filter. It was original to the bike, which meant it was overdue regardless of the contamination issue. And he told Real as much through the open office door. Put in whatever it needs, Real called back. He replaced the filter with a unit he had in stock, flushed the lines with clean solvent, ran a pressure check on each injector in sequence. One of them was partially clogged. Not from tonight's contamination, but from accumulated buildup, the kind that develops slowly and politely doesn't announce itself until it causes a problem. He cleaned it, reinstalled it, torqued everything back to spec. Around 3:30, he heard Real moving around in the office, not restlessly, just the sound of a man who was used to being awake at strange hours, and had made a kind of peace with it. At one point, he appeared in the doorway between the office and the shop floor. You're good at this, Real said. Kieran didn't look up from what he was doing. I know what I'm doing. That's different from good, is it? Good implies something extra. I'm accurate. I'm thorough. If I don't know something, I say so and I find out. That's not the same as good. Real was quiet for a moment. Then, most people would have taken the compliment. Most people aren't still trying to figure out if injector 2 is seated right. There was a short silence and then Real laughed, a low real laugh, the kind that costs something. He went back to the office. At 4:17 in the morning, Kieran cranked the road glide. She fired on the first attempt. No hesitation, no lean stumble. The idle settled immediately into the deep, even pulse of a healthy engine, and Kieran sat on the stool beside the bike and listened to it for 30 seconds without moving, the way he always did at the end of a job, because the engine would tell you if you'd missed something, and it was better to find out now than later. She had nothing to tell him. Everything was right. He went to the door of the office. It's done. Real came out and stood beside the bike and let it run for a minute without touching it. He listened to it the same way Kieran had, which told Kieran something about the man. Then he looked over at Kieran. What do I owe you? Kieran had been thinking about this. The job, filter, flush, injector cleaning, fuel, labor, would have been $340 at Gervais's standard rate. But it was almost 4:30 in the morning, and he had done this job off the books, without authorization, in violation of a direct instruction from his employer. And he had done it because it had been the right thing to do, and he would make the same choice again if he had to. He quoted the standard rate. Real pulled out his wallet and counted cash. Kieran noticed he didn't fumble with it, didn't make a show, just counted it cleanly and added $100 on top. That's too much, Kieran said. You were here at 2 in the morning doing a job you didn't have to do, Real said. It's not enough, actually. But it's what I have in cash. Kieran took the money because arguing would have been its own kind of disrespect. He wrote up a handwritten receipt. He always did, even for jobs that weren't in the system, because he believed records mattered, and gave Real the carbon copy. Real folded it and put it in his inside vest pocket. He looked at Kieran for a moment, a direct evaluating look, the kind people give when they're deciding whether to say something. You work here alone at night? He asked. When there's work to do, Kieran said. Gervais know you do this? There was a half second of something in the air. Gervais has his rules, Kieran said carefully. I have mine. Real nodded slowly, as if that answer meant something specific to him. He pulled on his jacket, picked up his helmet. He started the road glide, listened to her for one more moment, then looked back at Kieran. Be careful, he said. Not a pleasantry. A statement of fact, the kind someone says when they know something you don't yet know you need to know. Then he rode out of the bay into the dark and the wind coming off the river. And Kieran stood in the door of the shop and watched the taillight disappear around the bend of the access road. And he went back inside to finish Mrs. Pelletier's Silverado. Raymond Gervais arrived at 7:45 that morning, which was 15 minutes earlier than usual, which was how Kieran knew something was wrong before he even saw the man's face. He'd gone home at 5:30, slept 3 hours, come back in at 7. He was pouring his second coffee when Gervais's truck pulled into the lot. Gervais was a compact man in his mid-50s, economical in his movements, with the kind of face that had once been handsome and was now just closed. He'd built the shop from a 2-bay operation 30 years ago, and he was proud of it in the way that people are proud of things they paid for in full. He ran it according to principles that were not unreasonable on paper. No debt, no exceptions, no complications. And the problem was that real life had a habit of being complicated in ways the principals didn't account for. He came in through the side door, not the main entrance. He set his thermos on the counter with the particular deliberateness of someone managing anger. Then he turned and looked at Kieran. "You want to tell me what happened last night?" Kieran set his coffee down. He had known this was coming. He'd had 3 hours of sleep to think about how he was going to handle it, and he decided that he was going to handle it straight. A man came in at 2:14. His bike had fuel contamination, probably from a compromised pump somewhere on the 20. He wasn't going to make it to a hotel without it being addressed. "I did the job, charged standard rate, wrote a receipt, everything's logged." Gervais looked at him for a long time. "I have a camera on the bay door," he said, timesman on the footage. Kieran had known about the camera. He'd thought about it while he was deciding whether to open the door. "I know," he said. "You know my rule, I know your rule, and you open the door anyway." "Yes." Gervais picked up his thermos. He took a long breath through his nose. "I've had 3 incidents in this shop in 30 years, he said. 3 incidents where someone opened that door outside of hours and I ended up dealing with the fallout. Insurance liability, one situation that went sideways in a way I don't want to go into. I made that rule for reasons." "I understand," Kieran said. "Do you?" Gervais set the thermos down again. "Because understanding it and respecting it are different things. You understood it perfectly well last night and you didn't respect it." There was nothing Kieran could say to that because it was accurate. "I can't keep you on," Gervais said. "I'm not doing this out of anger. I want to be clear about that. I'm doing it because I can't run this shop with someone who makes a different call than the call I need them to make. I can't insure for that. I can't manage for that. You're good at the work, Kieran. You're one of the best I've had. But good at the work isn't the only thing this job requires." Kieran nodded once. He felt the ground shift under him, not dramatically, not the way it happened in movies, just the quiet, sickening way that real loss announces itself. "I'll clear out my tools," he said. "Take the time you need," Gervais said. And he meant it. Kieran could tell, which somehow made it worse. He was putting his socket set into the bottom tray of his toolbox when he heard a vehicle pull into the lot. Not a bike, a car, something heavy. He didn't look up. He heard Gervais go to the office window. He heard the window go quiet for a moment in the particular way it does when someone is paying very close attention to what they're seeing. Then Gervais came back into the shop, and he was walking differently. Not faster, exactly, but more carefully, the way people walk when they're recalibrating. "There's a man in the lot who wants to talk to you," Gervais said. Kieran looked up. Through the bay door, he could see a dark green SUV with Quebec government plates. And leaning against the passenger door with his arms folded was a man in a suit who was watching the bay with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be and no intention of leaving. And standing beside him, hands in the pockets of his jacket, wearing the same cut from the night before, was Réal. His full name was Réal Gagnon. Kieran didn't know what that was supposed to mean to him until the man in the suit introduced himself as Étienne Gagnon, Deputy Minister of Transport for Quebec. And the way he said the name made it clear that the two men shared more than a province. "Brothers," Étienne said unnecessarily, given that they had the same gray eyes and the same way of standing still. They were in the office now, all 4 of them, and Gervais had gone pale in a way that was very subtle but impossible to miss if you were looking. Étienne explained that he had come because Réal had called him at 6 in the morning, which was not unusual for their relationship, and had described what had happened the night before. Not just the bike, the whole night. He had described Kieran's competence and his precision, and the fact that he had been there alone at 2 in the morning doing work he didn't have to do, for no reason other than that a man had needed his help. "He told me about the receipt," Étienne said, "that you wrote it even for an after-hours job that wasn't in your system." "Records matter," Kieran said. He wasn't sure why he said it. It was just true. Étienne looked at him for a moment with an expression Kieran couldn't quite read. "The province is contracting out maintenance for the highway fleet up through the lower St. Lawrence corridor," he said. "Fleet contract, long-term. We've been looking for someone to manage a satellite shop in Rimouski, someone with diagnostic skills and the kind of judgment that doesn't get taught in certification programs." The room was very quiet. Gervais said nothing. He was looking at the desk. Réal, for his part, was looking at Kieran with the same evaluating look as the night before, patient, direct, waiting to see what the younger man was going to do with what he'd just been handed. "I don't have my red seal yet," Kieran said. "I left school before I finished." "I know," Étienne said. "I had your employment record pulled this morning. You've been doing red seal level work for 3 years without the ticket. We'll support you through the certification. That's not an obstacle." Kieran thought about Mrs. Pelletier's Silverado, which was finished and waiting in Bay 2, and which he would still need to call her about today regardless of what happened in this room. He thought about Bernard in the driveway in Matane, handing him a wrench and saying nothing, trusting him to figure out what it was for. He thought about the road outside at 4:17 in the morning, dark and cold and empty, and the sound of an engine running clean. He looked at Réal. Réal gave him a small nod. Not encouragement, acknowledgement. Like he already knew what Kieran was going to say and was just waiting for him to say it. All right, Kieran said. Yes, he finished clearing out his tools. Gervais shook his hand at the door, a real handshake, not a formal one, and neither of them said anything about the morning because there wasn't anything useful left to say about it. The decision Gervais had made had been the right one by his own standards. The thing that happened after it was just life doing what life does when you make honest choices in honest faith. It doesn't always go sideways. Sometimes it keeps going. Raoul walked with Kieran out to the lot while Etienne made a phone call on the far side of the SUV. You knew who he was, Kieran said. Last night, you knew you could have made a call and had someone come to you. Yes, Raoul said. So why didn't you? Rio looked out toward the river, which was invisible from here but present in the smell of the air and the quality of the cold. Because a man who opens a door at 2 in the morning for a stranger he doesn't know is more useful to my brother than a man who opens a door because he knows who the stranger is. He paused. You understand the difference? Kieran did. He put his toolbox in the back of his truck. He sat in the cab for a moment before starting it, hands on the wheel, looking at the shop he'd worked in for 3 years through the windshield. The crack in the clock casing above the parts shelf was visible from here, if you knew where to look. Then he started the truck, pulled out of the lot, and drove toward the river.